The setting sun bled across the Florida scrubland, painting the saw palmettos in hues of gold and rust. A warm, heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant calls of unseen birds and the soft rustle of dry fronds. Under the shade of a stout cabbage palm, Clara, her dress a tattered, blood-splattered ruin, sagged against its rough trunk, her face a mask of raw terror and exhaustion. Her hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and her eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted frantically across the horizon. Across from her, crouched low, was Silas Thorne. His dark cowboy hat shadowed a face etched with concern, and a crimson bandana tied around his neck stood out starkly against his dusty shirt. His gaze was fixed on Clara, his brown eyes searching, assessing. His horse, a sturdy bay named Ranger, stood patiently a few yards away, its saddle gleaming faintly in the dying light. "They're gone, Clara," Silas said, his voice a low, steady rumble, a counterpoint to the wild beat of her heart. "Rode off toward the west. We're safe now." But Clara didn't seem to hear him. She just whimpered, clutching at the torn fabric of her dress, her gaze still fixed on the empty expanse of prairie grass. No, they'll come back. They always come back. They'll find me. They'll finish it." The attack had been swift and brutal, a sudden descent from the peaceful afternoon. Silas, a solitary cattleman driving a small herd towards the market in Kissimmee, had stumbled upon the scene by chance. A small family homestead, nestled by a creek, now a burning ruin. And Clara, being dragged from the inferno by 3 wild-eyed men, her screams tearing through the quiet air. He hadn't hesitated. He was no lawman, just a man who believed in decency. His rifle, a trusty Winchester, had cracked, and 2 of the men had fallen. The third, a burly brute with a scarred face, had turned on him with a blade, but Silas was quicker, more practiced. The fight had been short, vicious. When the dust settled, 2 raiders were dead, the third fled, and Silas found Clara, bruised and bleeding, pulling her from the burning remnants of her home. He'd brought her here, to this lone palm, the nearest patch of shade in the vast, open land. He'd done what he could to staunch the bleeding from a shallow cut on her arm, tearing a strip from his own shirt. But the wounds to her spirit, he knew, ran far deeper. "They won't," Silas insisted, pushing a small tin canteen towards her. "Not tonight. We're too far off the main trail. They'll be licking their wounds and ridden hard to outrun any posse that might form." Clara stared at the canteen, then at Silas, her eyes finally focusing on him. Suspicion mingled with the terror, a wild, cornered animal look. Who are you?" "Silas Thorne," he replied, his voice calm. "Just a man passing through. Heard the commotion. You killed them," she whispered, a strange mixture of horror and awe in her tone. "They were killing you," he said simply, "and your family." He avoided her gaze then, looking at the distant line of cypress trees. He'd seen the bodies, 2 men and a woman, shot down like dogs in the doorway of their burning home. Ben, her husband, if you remembered the talk in the last settlement right, a young couple, full of hope, now just another tragic tale of the frontier. He wasn't ready to tell her about Ben yet. Let her have this moment of reprieve, however fragile. Clara's gaze drifted to Ranger, then back to Silas. "You're a cattleman," he nodded. "Driven a small herd to Kissimmee. Was anyway." They scattered after the gunfight. She was silent for a long moment, the sounds of the scrubland filling the void. Then, slowly, she reached for the canteen. Her hands trembled as she brought it to her lips, taking a long, deep drink. The water, cool and metallic, seemed to bring a flicker of life back to her. "Thank you," she rasped, handing it back. "Thank you for saving me." Anyone would have done the same, he lied. He knew better. Many men would have ridden past, minding their own business. It was easier that way, safer, but he couldn't. Not after what he'd seen. "No," she said, her eyes fixed on him. They wouldn't. Not everyone. He shifted uncomfortably. What's your name, child? Clara, she replied, her voice stronger now. Clara Jensen? Where's your family, Clara? He asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. She recoiled, her eyes clouding with fresh terror. They're back at the homestead. I heard them. The shots. They were fighting. Silas knew he couldn't put it off forever, but he needed to choose his words carefully. Clara, there's nothing left at the homestead. The fire. It took everything. Her face went pale, a terrible understanding dawning in her eyes. Ben, my ma, ... Her voice trailed off, a silent scream building in her throat. They're gone, aren't they? They're dead. Silas simply nodded, his gaze compassionate, sorrowful. I'm sorry, Clara, I truly am. A raw guttural cry tore from her, a sound of pure agony that clawed at the quiet evening. She hunched over, burying her face in her knees, her small body racked with dry sobs. The vastness of the land seemed to swallow her grief, leaving only the endless, indifferent sky. Silas sat in silence, letting her cry. There were no words, no platitudes that could ease this kind of pain. He just waited, a silent, steady presence in her shattered world. After a long time, the sobs subsided, replaced by the occasional shuddering breath. Clara lifted her head, her face blotchy, her eyes swollen, but a new, hard glint had entered them. What do I do? She whispered, her voice hollow. You survive, Silas said, his voice firm. That's what you do. You keep going, but where? I have nothing. No home, no family, no money. Just this dress and the clothes on my back. You have your life, he said, holding her gaze. And that's more than some have. I'm heading to Kissimmee. My herd scattered, but I can gather em up again. You can ride with me? It ain't a fancy town, but there's a doctor, a general store. You can find work, start over. She looked at him, her eyes searching. Why? Why would you help me? He shrugged, a typical cowboy gesture, but his gaze was earnest. Because it's the right thing to do, Clara. And because, ... because no one deserves to face this alone. He didn't tell her about his own past, about the wife and child he'd lost to a fever many years ago, the way he'd almost given up. He just knew what it felt like to be alone. She was silent for a long moment, weighing his offer, her options, none. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, Silas, I'll go with you. Good, he said, rising. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. The air was still warm, but a hint of night chill was beginning to creep in. We'll camp here tonight. Get some rest. We'll start at first light. He gathered some dry palmetto fronds and twigs, building a small, smokeless fire. He shared the last of his jerky and hardtack. Clara ate slowly, mechanically, still numb from shock, but the food seemed to ground her, a small tether to the world of the living. As the night deepened, the fire cast flickering shadows. Silas kept his rifle close, his senses alert. He watched Clara, curled by the fire, her eyes open, staring blankly into the flames. He knew she wouldn't sleep much tonight. He wouldn't either. Silas, she whispered after a long silence. Yeah, Clara. Will it always hurt like this? He paused, choosing his words carefully. The sharpest edges, they dull with time, child. They never quite disappear, but they get easier to carry. You learn to live with M. You learn to build around M. He thought of his own scars, invisible but ever present. You learn to find new reasons to keep going. She was silent again, and Silas wondered if she'd heard him. But then, softly, she said, I hope so. He spent the rest of the night on watch, his mind wrestling with the scattered remains of his herd and the new responsibility of Clara. This wasn't how he'd envisioned his drive to Kissimmee, but life on the frontier rarely went according to plan. They started at dawn, riding east, back towards where Silas had last seen his cattle. Clara, though still visibly shaken, rode with a newfound grim determination. Her tears were gone, replaced by a steely resolve. "You, a good rider?" Silas asked her, watching her handle Ranger. She sat tall in the saddle, despite her exhaustion. "My PA taught me," she said, her voice flat. "Always said a woman out here needed to be able to ride as well as any man." Silas nodded approvingly. He was right. They rode for hours, scanning the horizon for any sign of his herd. The sun beat down, relentless, but Clara didn't complain. She just rode, her gaze steady, absorbing the landscape. Towards midday, they spotted them, a small group of cows, milling near a shallow creek bed, already making their way towards the main trail. "There they are," Silas said, a hint of relief in his voice. "We'll gather 'em, then head south. It'll be slow going for a few days." Clara watched him expertly cut out the strays, guiding them back into a semblance of a herd. She saw the quiet competence in his movements, the way he handled Ranger, the way he understood the land. He was a good man, a decent man, caught in an indecent world. The next few days were a blur of dust and heat. Silas taught Clara how to keep the herd moving, how to spot trouble, how to manage the canteen. He saw her grow stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. The raw terror in her eyes slowly receded, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. She still carried her grief, a heavy cloak she wore, but she was learning to carry it with dignity.